Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Manny Maradiege, coming back on here live to talk to you guys about some more stories, give you guys some more discussions about the NFL and just football in general that I've seen in the news lately, in any sort of social media that's going on, and so forth. I got some more segments here for you guys today to discuss. Initially, we're going to start with the Chip Shots segment of the show. After the Chip Shots segment, or actually during the Chip Shots segment, I want to talk about a couple comments that I saw during some morning shows yesterday and into today. Some analyst, Bart Scott on ESPN, said something about Michael Parsons specifically and the Cowboys, and Chris Sims from NBC, or features on NBC, is on other programs as well, made some comments on who he thinks is the most overrated quarterback or player in the NFL. So I'll get into that. I'll also be talking more about the Falcons specifically and their quarterback search after some comments that their general manager made in the news in an interview recently as well, and some scenarios that could happen if his words are to be taken seriously. Later on in the show, in the second half of the show, I will be bringing up the players that will most likely get franchise tagged in this period of the off season. Starting today all the way to March 5th is the period where teams can designate the franchise tags out to certain players, and then after that they are able to hit free agency. And lastly, another discussion I wanted to talk about, some things that I felt that each of the past teams in this past playoffs for the AFC, what those teams could specifically do to build on their good seasons, their better than average seasons this past year. What's one move they could make to kind of elevate them, to take them further, whether it be to the AFC Championship, past the first round, into the Super Bowl. What's one thing they could do to move just further along in their journey during next season? But before I get into all the topics, I want to remind you guys, as always, before I start the show, that we get a lot of comments and a lot of engagement from people during the show. So please make sure, if I'm able to see your question, to use the link down below that is running across the ticker down below me or to the left of me. The tip and donations link is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. Again, the tip and donations link is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. This just makes sure I'm able to see your guys' question. It's put to the top of the list, and I am able to engage with you guys with any sort of comments, questions that you may have during the show. It's a big help, not only for this show, but for the network overall, if you guys are able to do that, and it's greatly appreciated by everyone here. So, that all being said, we can jump into the first segment, the Chip Shot segment, as usual, and some comments that were made in the media. Again, I swear this isn't a Cowboys show, but it's just that the Cowboys are always the team that's being talked about, that's just always being mentioned in the news, or they're saying stuff on their own media outlets, and it just gets put out in the news and everyone starts to talk about it. So basically, I think a few days ago, it was Michael Parsons in the news making some comments that DeMarcus Lawrence made in the week leading up to the Super Bowl. He was on First Take and said stuff like that. I will get into that more tomorrow and kind of break down those comments. But it got to the ESPN desk, the Get Up desk yesterday morning, I want to say, and Bart Scott, a former player for the Ravens, the Jets, a linebacker, other than being very animated and very passionate in what he said in his facial expressions, he said some pretty harsh words about Michael Parsons. I have the quote right here. He said, "He's the most sensitive guy that Bart's ever seen. He needs to go to leadership school and learn how to lead by example and quit talking so much and being so damn sensitive. You're a linebacker that's supposed to be a tough guy spot. That's the most sensitive guy I've ever seen. He responds to everything. Get off of social media. Quit tweeting. Quit talking about responding and go about your business. And again, those are pretty harsh words to come from Bart Scott about Michael Parsons and just the Cowboys in general. I think it kind of speaks to what they got going on there and the culture and the kind of leadership. I brought up yesterday that I thought it was a good idea that general manager, owner Jerry Jones and Michael Parsons were having good conversation about, maybe Jerry Jones getting his input on stuff that he might have some doubts over. Michael Parsons giving his intel to him, letting him know from a player's perspective, from a locker room perspective, what's going on, what are their feelings and everything like that. And I said those were good qualities to have for a leader, someone who's maturing, someone who could lead this new generation in the right direction. But then you see stuff like this. And when I saw Micah's quote about DeMarcus Lawrence and just talking about culture and stuff to that extent, I didn't think it was so bad that he said that. But it just always seems like this just boils down to, or the best decision always comes out to just keeping it between the two guys, keeping it in the locker room like everyone says, because I'm sure DeMarcus Lawrence, after thinking about it in hindsight, he probably shouldn't have said what he said on there. Again, I'll go into it more tomorrow, but he went along the lines of saying just like, basically that they weren't ready. They felt tired, and that's what kind of led to them going out, and Michael Parsons responded to that. And then, you have Bart Scott coming on ESPN and just giving a rant about some of his true feelings towards Michael Parsons and where he believes he can grow. And from that aspect, I kind of see where he's coming from. But then I got to thinking again, that's now another person, former player, talking about the Cowboys locker room, the Cowboys culture, and how it's just really missing. It's the lacking part of a championship winning team. You had Emmitt Smith saying some words as well, commenting on how he viewed the Cowboys locker room now, the Cowboys culture now. I'm paraphrasing, but he said something along the lines around, that this Cowboys team now, everyone has their podcast, everyone's active on social media, they want to give their own opinion, but none of them have actually had any success of their own. They're just riding on the success of the past, of what his teams did in the past, and that they have to get back to winning and focusing on just playing the game. And again, you can take it however you want. It could be true in some sense that, that they have their own outlets, they give their opinions as well, but you could say that a lot about a lot of teams that or a lot of players on teams that are a lot more successful than they are. If you want to look at the Chiefs, Travis Kelce has his own podcast with his brother Jason Kelce, and they talk about stuff that he's asked about, things they want to give their 2 cents on. If they want to rant about something, they'll go on there and say it, and they don't let it distract them. They don't let anything prevent them from, keeping the main thing, playing football. That's their job. That's their profession. So I don't think it's so much that everyone wants to give their own opinion. Everyone's focused on other things other than football. I just think everyone in that locker room needs to, kind of watch what they're saying, be more media savvy, have more media literacy, I guess. I feel like I'm teaching a class or something, giving some advice on media literacy, but they kind of need something like that, because a lot of times they get these platforms and stuff like that, and they don't really think twice about how things can be interpreted, how a lot of things on the internet can be misguided. There's a lot of misinformation and stuff like that, and things get twisted. So I think a lot of that stuff was kind of lost in translation, just taking it however people wanted to take it. But on the other hand, I still think there's some truth to that this Cowboys team needs to just be more focused and focused on some of the main things that they've been lacking, and just really try not to talk about every single thing that they're mentioned in social media. And on top of that, moving on to the next quote I saw that I thought was pretty again, pretty alarming and pretty serious. It came from Chris Sims on a recent interview as well, talking about Jalen Hurts. The quote that he said recently was, "I respect a lot about Jalen Hurts, but I think Jalen Hurts is also the most overrated player in football. That's me. I know I'm wrong. I take a lot of crap about that comment, but he plays quarterback for a team that's an all-star team. They have the best O-line in football. It's not even close. I just think if you put some other QB in there, you put Kyler Murray in there, you'd say, dang, Kyler's amazing. Is he the MVP of football?" That was his most recent quote, and I wanted to talk about that just because my opinion on it, I don't think Jalen Hurts, to say he's the most overrated player in football, I don't think that's the case, because this team, as they got better, Jalen Hurts also got better, but I think without him and his performance in the Super Bowl most recently, of a high-stakes game for the Eagles, I don't think they get even close to being in that game with the Chiefs. If it's not for a fumble that, granted, he's the one that fumbled in that Super Bowl, and then a penalty that's been talked about a lot just 2 years ago, that holding call on Juju, or on Bradbury guarding Juju, they could have easily probably won that game, or else it would have been a lot closer, 3-point game, definitely less than it was. But to say those comments, all right, I looked into it a little bit more. I said, that's just, another opinion. You can say what you want about the Eagles and their high-caliber offense, the players that they have on it. But at the same time, this year now, it's the same group of players, but they didn't play that much better. And you can put that on Jalen Hurts. You can say he finally showed what kind of player he is, the kind of level that he showed at the same time. But I don't think that a lot of players could have, one, fit into the system that they're trying to run with Jalen Hurts. I think a lot of their offense is predicated on his abilities and his ability to throw the ball, make reads, get people open, but his ability to run most of all. I don't think you can plug a lot of players in there and they will have the same success that Jalen Hurts has, because they could be pocket passers, just a lot better maneuvers of space in the pocket as well as that. So I just think Jalen Hurts, in a way, has been getting a bad rap for that, but I kind of dug a little deeper and just saw some other comments Sims made back in September of 2023, on September 27th, when the tush push was kind of gaining momentum. A lot of it was being said about it. He said back then that if he was the defensive coordinator, he'd say to his team, I'd be go headhunting on the quarterback here, go ahead, let him have it, dive over, go crazy. And then the last part, he said, try to kill the quarterback. And then right after he said, he didn't mean it like that. He took it out of context, or trying to let people not take it out of context. But, I mean, one, those comments are pretty crazy to say. And I just think once you hear the quote that he made back there in the past, you can kind of understand why he would say something like that more recently. And, that's just his opinion. And there could be some truth to that. Some fans and some analysts could think that about Jalen Hurts, but I just think he's had one good season where he was the catalyst leading the Eagles to the Super Bowl. Great performances, MVP level type of plays that he made there in that year. Now this year, rough year. Just overall, I don't think it just falls on him. The whole organization, the coaching, everything seemed to be bad and just not clicking as it is. I think this coming season will be a lot a better intel on seeing what kind of quarterback, what kind of team the Eagles really are, because now they've tasted both sides of the coin here, and it'll be a good telling sign now this year that where they are, specifically Jalen Hurts, where he is in his development, if he could rebound after a tough year, be that leader that everyone sees that he is on social media with some of the quotes and things he says in press game conferences and everything. If he rebounds as the way he is, I think a lot of those critics will just quiet down, and you won't be seeing a lot of people doubt Jalen Hurts. But it all has to be proven next season, and how they come out, how they hire some coaches and really change stuff that didn't go right this past year. But that's going to be it for the Chip Shot segment. and just the first segment overall. We're going to go to a quick break, and on the other side of that break, I'm going to be bringing you guys some more quarterback talk on specifically the Falcons situation and what some of their GM's recent comments mean going forward in this offseason. So don't go anywhere. I'll be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny, and if you missed the first segment, I just went over the chip shot segment, talking about some recent comments I saw in the media from some analysts and just my thoughts on them, and just recapping it all for you guys, giving you guys some more context on what went behind those comments and stuff like that. But now we can dive deeper into the Atlanta Falcons and their quarterback search. Again, a lot of people are doing interviews, answering questions about where their individual teams are going, what kind of things their fans and everybody else can expect from them this offseason. One of them was the Falcons. They got a new head coach in Raheem Morris, new offensive coordinator as well, and a big narrative about them last year was their quarterback play. Obviously, it wasn't up to the level that it should be with Desmond Ridder there and Tyler Heineke playing some games as well, and it was just a lot of on and off, a lot of switching between two guys, and you obviously can't have that in the NFL and in the NFC, where I think I've mentioned on the show before that the NFC, in my opinion, is a lot weaker than the AFC, so there's a lot more opportunity for the Falcons to make the playoffs, and at one point they were close because they were riding off some good wins, some good performances, and then it kind of all fell off during the midway to end part of the season. So now they get some new fresh faces in there, potentially a new identity hopefully for the Atlanta Falcons fans that have been dying for their weapons really to be used to their maximum potential. Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier, as well as a good running back duo that they have going on there. Jonnu Smith, another tight end. They just need to find the quarterback, get the guy that gets them the ball, and really bring that offense to that full potential that everyone assumes and sees that it could reach. But in saying that, the Falcons general manager said in a recent interview this week that on the quarterback search that's a top priority for us this offseason. It's exciting. We're going to spend a lot of time together, make sure we attack that the right way. We're not going to close any doors, be it trades, free agency, or the draft. We will make sure we keep an open mind there, and we're going to attack it and make sure we get it right. That was the Falcons GM on their mindset on the quarterback search this offseason. And it's some pretty encouraging signs there for the Falcons and just their fans following along, because at this point, there's a few options or a few ways that they could go about finding their quarterback. Potentially the quarterback of the future if everything goes right the way they think. And I mentioned there are some few options. They could go through free agency. They have $21.6 million in cap space. Or the draft. They have 7 picks. They're picking at number 8 in the first round. And just from what I've seen in mock drafts, in just analysts talking about what the Falcons need. The two most glaring needs, it seems to be, are pass rusher and quarterback, obviously, like I mentioned. They kind of retooled a little bit on the defensive side this past year, getting Calais Campbell, but Dupree there to bring in some more pass rushing, but it didn't pan out as they would have hoped. The numbers and production from those two guys weren't there, and just overall as a defense, they still lacked that pressure on the quarterback. I mean, Grady Jarrett, I think, got the most pressures, was the one really creating the most havoc, but it didn't pan out as much as other teams you see with top defenses that make an impact. You want your defense to make an impact, and I just think the Falcons were lacking that this past season, at least on the defensive side. When their offense couldn't get it going, they couldn't rely on their defense as much as they would have wanted to. But I wanted to break down those scenarios a bit for you guys. I mentioned free agency. I'm going to give you guys some guys that they could acquire through free agency or via trade, and give you guys my intel on each of those scenarios and make a final decision there in the end of what I think the Falcons could do to potentially find their quarterback of the future, or at least to get into that next level and progress under this new era under Raheem Morris. So free agency would be the first stop I want to make, because I mentioned they have the cap room to attack some of the guys, and there are a lot of names out there like Kirk Cousins, Ryan Tannehill, Justin Fields, Mason Rudolph, if you want to go down that route. But my pick for them would be just in the division, a guy that took this team to the playoffs as far as he's ever been to the playoffs, and that would be Baker Mayfield. I was really a fan of what Baker Mayfield did this past season with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers after some rough years in Carolina. Just spending a year, or not even a year, I think, in Los Angeles with the Rams, and most of his time with the Browns, that ended ugly. But to find a nice pit stop in Tampa Bay where he was able to regain some of his confidence, show everyone that talent that he had coming out of college, I think he did all that and more to raise his stock now in free agency, where I think teams will give him a very solid contract compared to those of, I don't know, Geno Smith, Derek Carr. Those guys that sit in like the 25 to 30 range, he could potentially get more just because of how well he played. But that's kind of the range, the floor that I set for any sort of contract that I expect Baker Mayfield to be getting. In the end, I just think he played the best I've ever seen him play. He had a 64% completion percentage. That's his best since his rookie year in 2018. And the most yards he's ever thrown was this year. He threw over 4,000 yards. The most touchdowns at 28 he's ever thrown. And both of those are top 10 among quarterbacks this past season. And just those stats alone, he showed out his arm talent. He showed that he could get the ball to very talented guys in Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. He had a good running game with White there in Tampa Bay. Chris Ian, his tight end as well, was a above average tight end. He relied a lot on Ian as well this past season. And the talent that Tampa Bay had, you could easily compare that to the talent that the Falcons have, but just younger. You don't know how good this Falcons offense could really get. Honestly speaking, in 3 years, if you want to sign Baker Mayfield to that long of a deal, even 4 years, all these guys are very early on in their careers, early 20s. Still for, I think, all those guys, except maybe, obviously, Johnny Smith. But most of those guys, Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan just is a rookie. Tyler Algier as well might be in his second year, I think. You don't know if those guys can get to the level of Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and just those two guys alone. They're obviously deeper in their careers, but they could even get better than that. They could produce better numbers, but no one will ever know unless they get a very sound quarterback in there that could elevate their level at least for 3 years or 2 years, because they're going to be Atlanta Falcons, I think, for a long time. At least that's the plan for Atlanta and their general manager and their organization, to keep these guys, these caliber level guys, around for a long time. And Baker Mayfield, I'm not saying he's going to be around for the next 8 to 10 years because he's already 28, 29, but he's in that ripe veteran age of a quarterback where he could come in right away, learn under Raheem Morris, the kind of scheme they want to run under their new offensive coordinator, and get it all running a lot smoother early on than if you draft a guy, if you sign a guy that's even older than Baker Mayfield and you're only planning to keep around for a year. I'm not really a big fan of that mindset just because, it's just like a stoppage. It's just you're just kind of blocking the flood from coming out. At some point, you're going to have to remove it, replace it, and then fix the entire problem again itself. And I think with Baker Mayfield, he gives you a longer time window. He's proven that he could play not only in the division, but in the conference. He gave a lot of good teams a run for their money. The Lions, he was in a great game with the Lions, but it didn't pan out for him in the end there. But with the Falcons, I think they're building something exciting with a lot of young talent that a guy like Baker Mayfield can come in and really command and order that offense in a way that not only he wants, but just fits the system and scheme for them to have better than, I think, a 7-10 record, if my memory serves me right, this past year. So that's one option. I think that's a very safe option for the Falcons. The second one, a bit more nostalgic, a bit more emotional one if you want to go the route of Justin Fields and trading for a quarterback. Now, I think last time I checked, the Steelers were the favorite to land Justin Fields. Now, more recently, I think I saw today, Justin Fields is now, or the Falcons are now the favorite to land Justin Fields. And it makes sense, just like I mentioned, for that nostalgia feeling, that emotional connection there with Justin Fields, because he is from Atlanta. And, there's been some rumors in that draft that he got taken in 2021. There was a lot of voiced mock drafts and rumors that the Falcons could take him at 4, but obviously they took Kyle Pitts in that draft. And Justin Fields, I think, gets a bad rap because he's a great runner, and I just feel like people think that's all he does. But I just don't see him doing better with the kind of support staff that the Bears have put around him. And, they drafted him to be the guy, to be the franchise guy, but they just most recently got DJ Moore there, and Cole Kmet kind of just started getting into being a very good tight end. But then they lose David Montgomery. They have no real run game, and it's all based on Justin Fields, his running ability and his throwing ability. A lot more pressure is being put on him to produce. And I just don't think it's an area where he's able to carry it all on just him, his performance this early on in his career. Obviously, with the Falcons, they have all that talent I just mentioned. And in the end, just to throw out some numbers to kind of compare it to Baker Mayfield, it's 60% completion percentage, the best Justin Fields has had in his 3 years, the most yards he's ever thrown for over 2,500, 16 throwing touchdowns for him this past year, and a career low in interceptions in 9. And they're not the most gaudy numbers throwing wise, but he's just another dynamic kind of player that would add another just level of talent and skill to this Falcons offense that I think is the most likely one for me to happen because, like I mentioned, of where they stand in the draft and where Baker Mayfield, that's a safer option. I think this one's the most likely option just because I think they want to build up that excitement, have everyone wanting to know how this is going to work out. And if it turns out great and Justin Fields elevates his level to even better than this past season, it's going to be one of the greatest and most exciting young teams, not just in the NFC, but the whole league as a whole. Now, am I picking them to win the NFC? Probably not, but it just brings that excitement, that buzz around the city that I think Atlanta has been missing for some time now. And just to wrap it up, obviously they could draft a quarterback, but that would require a big haul, in my opinion, because if you're going to move up for one of the top 3 guys, Caleb Williams, Drake May, or Jaden Daniels, they could all be gone within the top 3 picks. So if you want to take a risk in taking J.J. McCarthy or a player like that where you stand at 8, that to me is an even bigger risk than trading for Justin Fields, because you don't know what J.J. McCarthy is going to be, what he's going to look like. At least you have some tape on Justin Fields, and you can kind of work with it, see where he's made mistakes in the league compared to J.J. McCarthy that you can only watch his college tape. As well as that, I just don't think really the Commanders or the Patriots won't really, in my opinion, move from that spot, because I think the Commanders are in a spot where a lot of people, and I believe it too, that say that they're only about a quarterback away from being really competitive, at least in their division, just because they have a good wide receiver, Terry McLaurin, a pretty solid defense, and a new head coach in Dan Quinn that brings his success on the defensive side where they were lacking over to Washington and kind of apply it there. And I know Sam Howell wasn't awful. I said he wasn't terrible, but if you're sitting this high and you know you have a new head coach and everything like that, he didn't draft Sam Howell. It always almost works out that a new head coach wants to bring in a guy that he wants, to really be successful. As for the Patriots, I think they're the more likely one, because the Patriots need a lot more than just a quarterback to get back to competing in that very tough division, and let alone the conference. So they're the most likely one for me, but at the same time, how much would the Falcons be giving up in this journey that they're taking, trying to rebuild this team? Are they really willing to give up picks next year as well and kind of hinder that growth, hinder the kind of new players that they want to bring in next year for a quarterback that could be special in Jaden Daniels or Drake May, but again, you don't really know with these guys, and it all could turn sour very quickly with a new head coach and everything. If it all doesn't mesh well, it could look pretty bad, and then everyone's questioning the decision you make. So those three are the scenarios I think are the most likely. And again, like I said before, I think Justin Fields, in my opinion, is the one that will ultimately end up happening, just because of all that nostalgia and that good feeling that I think to get his confidence up, I think bringing him home to Atlanta would definitely help a lot in that, and just surrounding him with the talent as well could only help him regain the level of play that we saw this past year, and really mostly at Ohio State. But let me know what you guys think about that, where you think Justin Fields will end up going. I'm going to send it to another quick break, and on the other side of the show, I'm going to bring you the guys that I believe are the most likely to get tagged and what their situation sort of looks like. So I'm going to send it to a quick break, and I'll be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Now diving right back in to the second half of the show. I said I would talk to you guys about the players that are most likely to be tagged this coming offseason, now that teams are able to designate that tag. If you missed the first couple parts of the show, I talked most recently about the Falcons and their quarterback search, and what I think are the more likely scenarios for that to come into fruition and what they'll ultimately end up doing. So before I jump into the second half of the show, I want to remind you guys to please use the tip and donations link running across the ticker down below me with any questions that you may have. We usually get a lot of questions during the live show in the chat for me to see, and if you use the tip and donations link, it'll just put it to the top of the list. I can all see it there and just read it on air, engage with you guys. So if you see the link there, the tip and donations link is streamelements.com/GSMCsportsnetwork./tip. Again, the tip and donations link is streamelements.com/GSMCsportsnetwork./tip. Again, it's a big help for this show, but also a bunch of the shows here that we have running on the network, and we greatly appreciate if you guys would do that. But saying that, I'm able to move on to the next part of the show. I got 3 players, or really 4 players that I believe are the most likely to get tagged. Definitely before March 5th, if not pretty soon in the next couple of days. Those being Christian Wilkins, L'Jarius Sneed, and the 2 other pass rushers will be Josh Allen from the Jacksonville Jaguars and Brian Burns from the Carolina Panthers. So starting off with Christian Wilkins, arguably their most important player on that defensive side of the ball. One that I don't think gets talked about a lot, just because he plays D tackle, and if you're not putting up Aaron Donald type of numbers, double teams, stuff like that for people to see, it can get lost how massive they play a role in stopping the run, pressuring the quarterback, and stuff like that, being a leader for that defensive side of the ball. He's a bolt of energy for that defense. He's always talking. If you see him mic'd up or anything, he brings a lot more than the numbers show. And the way that the Dolphins situation is, they're $51 million over the cap, and they have other free agents to worry about currently. I talked about this before, I think back to the first show. Isaiah Wynn, Jerome Baker, and Andrew Van Ginkel on the defensive side. They have a lot of other players to focus on that could help them win as well. So if you have the option to tag Christian Wilkins like they do, I think they'll kind of push that negotiation a little bit back, work with these guys now, and pay Christian Wilkins eventually. But if they're able to tag him now, it'll work out better for them just in terms of money, extending that period of success. Even if you lose some guys next offseason, you still have a guy like Christian Wilkins that you can work with, tie him down for the next 3 or 4 years, to still make your defense pretty relevant and prominent with a game changer like Christian Wilkins is. Also, the defensive tackle market is around 31 to 24 million, with some other guys like Chris Jones waiting for an extension. He's going to get top money. Jeffrey Simmons got around 25-ish, $24 million. Quinnen Williams as well, the most recent one, got about $24 million per year. The only one that's way above that is Aaron Donald in terms of per year, because his was a 3-year deal instead of a 4-year deal like the rest of the guys were. But that market is already pretty lofty, so investing all that money now and then having none to pay the other guys, I think is why Christian Wilkins would make sense for the Dolphins to just push it back a little bit more. The second guy I mentioned was L'Jarius Sneed. Again, it just comes down to, trying to figure out what's better for you right now and also what's not going to harm you later on down the road. I think with Chris Jones, he already played on like a temporary deal. They're going to do whatever they can to try and get a deal done with him because his tag is $32 million or $32.5 million for Chris Jones. And they would rather tag L'Jarius Sneed, obviously, for the money because his cornerback market would be around 16 to like 19 million, around there or so for a franchise tag for a corner. The only corners that make more than that are Denzel Ward and Jair Alexander are the only ones that have more than 20 million per year, but they just got their most recent deals now. And L'Jarius Sneed, just off of the comments that he's been making about what he would say to the Chiefs general manager if he had a conversation with him about free agency or paying him, he would just say, to pay me. He wants to stay, but he also wants to get that lucrative contract that he believes, and that I believe too, honestly, that he deserves. But there's only so much money to go around for this Chiefs team that I think if they just push his negotiations back a little bit more and potentially get a deal done, they would be fine with that. But also, just on the recent actions that I read in an article recently, I wasn't aware that they drafted 4 corners in 2022, and they also drafted one just last season. So if you read between the lines, you kind of see that they're stockpiling on that position because of the fear that something like this could happen if they lose him to somebody else offering him more money or able to negotiate a better contract for him, he could walk. But at least the Chiefs have that in their mind already that, hey, this guy could be gone. So they're kind of preparing for it a little bit. Obviously, they would love to keep him just off the performance that he had this past season, but they gotta win some and lose some in these negotiations. It's never easy, but they could hope for the best. And if not, and if he does walk, I think they've shown it this past season they're able to reinvent themselves. And this past year they were able to rely on that very good, very talented young defense. What is stopping anyone from thinking that, all right, they lose L'Jarius Sneed, their defense is still solid? What's stopping anyone from thinking that they can't really improve the wide receiver room, the tight end room, the offensive line group, with the other money that they have, and go back to being a high-powered offense and just outscoring everybody? They were able to do that with Tyreek Hill. Obviously, they don't have a type of player like Tyreek Hill to his level, but they could invest a lot more in the offense and then just rely on the defense not as heavily, and instead in moments where they just need him to, in parts of some games where they need him to get 1 or 2 stops. I think this defense is still able to do that without L'Jarius Sneed, but that'll be a topic for a different day. And just the 2 edge rushers, I think they're pretty similar in a way that both of them have produced very good numbers and just performances overall in these past years, except Brian Burns in years before last year, because this past year it was a down year, not just for him, but for the whole Panthers team and organization as a whole. He's going to be wanting big money, and potentially I saw as well that he's a candidate to sign the deal, but also still be traded just because, things aren't really working out too well in Carolina, and he might just want to change the scenery. As for Josh Allen, he's coming off a much better year this past year. He had a franchise record of 17.5 sacks, top 10 in sacks with 32 over the last 3 seasons, and just franchise tagging him, really similar to Chris Jones, just keeps everyone's hands off of him, because putting up those kinds of numbers, not just last season, but in the past 3 seasons, they're very top 10, top 5 edge rushers, linebackers, whatever you want to call them, type of numbers, and those guys just don't fall to you in the draft unless you're super lucky or you've really done a lot of research into what kind of guy this kind of player could be. And the market for pass rushers really is similar for defensive ends or outside linebackers for whatever 3-4, 4-3 defense they want to run. It's about 21 to 25 million, except for Nick Bosa. That's at 34 million, and he's classed as a defensive end, whereas TJ Watt is an outside linebacker, I guess if you want to say, and he's the top earner there at 28 million per year. But those 2 guys are very similar, Josh Allen, Brian Burns, and just based on their team situation, the Panthers, I don't know what their free agent situation is, but they certainly don't want to lose a guy like Brian Burns. If they could work out a deal, maybe throwing a bit more money in there to kind of persuade him to stay and just invest in what they're trying to build, I'm sure they would love to do that, because I do think he is a talented player, and if he goes anywhere else, I'm sure he will definitely flourish, as well as Josh Allen. He's a catalyst for that defense, probably their best player, in my opinion, their most impactful player along that D-line and just defensive overall. And you can't lose guys like this, like I mentioned, to just any other team just because you don't want to pay them immediately. But those are the really 4 guys that I think are the most likely to get tagged right away in the offseason because of their scenarios, the kind of players they are, and their team situation. Each of their teams are in a good spot to potentially contending, other than the Panthers, obviously, but those other teams are in the playoff contention, real title contention, that losing a guy like this could really set them back pretty far. So let me know what you guys think about that and how quickly those guys will settle down into their teams or new teams potentially. But that'll be it for that segment. I'm going to send it to one quick break before I talk about the last discussion we could have, that being the teams that in the AFC that just made it to the playoffs. What I believe is one move they could have this offseason to take them further in the playoffs, potentially next season, or just improve overall. So don't go away. That discussion is coming up right after this break. Back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast for the last time of today. Of course, the show is presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Again, back here for the final segment of the show. Moves that the teams in the AFC need to make, that just made the playoffs, need to make to either go further in the playoffs or conference championship contention, potentially Super Bowl for some of these teams that were very close last season, and they just fell a little bit short. So diving straight into it, I'm going to talk about the Ravens first. I'm not going to talk about the Chiefs, obviously, just because they won the whole thing. They made it to the mountaintop, so I'll talk about the other 6 teams that were in contention. Starting with the Baltimore Ravens, the team that the Chiefs played in the AFC Championship. They have some offseason cleaning that they got to do. They don't have a lot of cap space, $600,000 in cap space according to ESPN. They have 8 picks in this coming draft, a lot of free agents to decide on, a lot of starters, pivotal starters from both sides of the ball. Patrick Queen, Kevin Zeitler, Gus Edwards, Geno Stone, Odell Beckham Jr. All those guys were starters basically, played prominent roles. Even if a guy like, Odell didn't get a lot of numbers, a lot of targets, didn't put up wide receiver 1 kind of numbers, he was still a bigger piece than people think of just because of the situations that the Ravens have had with wide receivers. He's one of the better ones that they've had, quite honestly, there in the time that Lamar Jackson's been there. But the biggest one for me is Patrick Queen. He's only going to be 25, 26 when next season's over, and he's going to be an unrestricted free agent. And to me, that's the biggest piece to try and re-sign for them. Kevin Zeitler is the other one I would say, just because he was a starter, and he is getting up there in age, but I think really those old linemen can kind of play. You can kind of extend them just a little bit further in terms of age and what's considered too old to play the position. I think for O-line, those guys, you could at least give Kevin Zeitler 1 more year if you don't want to invest through the draft that way, because you have a late round pick anyway, and you might want to address other numbers if some other guys walk, or try and do something in free agency. There's been a lot of rumors around Derrick Henry, potentially Saquon Barkley to add to that running game. If they lose a guy like Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins is also a free agent that I didn't mention. If they lose both of those guys, and, unfortunately for J.K. Dobbins, he's been injured most of his time with the Ravens, and in just my way of thinking, I wouldn't be surprised if they let him walk, if they let him go to free agency. But Gus Edwards had a more important role this past season, but he wasn't an exciting, electrifying running back like Derrick Henry or Saquon Barkley show out on the field. But they have been rumored to go to the Ravens, as sure as well as other teams that I have on this list are. But that's one way they could go. But in the end, after all those scenarios, questions, that possibilities that the Ravens could do, my final prediction on them, one thing they absolutely have to do is just going back to those free agents, making sure you get those eggs all counted up, aligned, get your ducks aligned, for another metaphor if you want to use that one. Get those guys signed, or at least the ones that you believe aren't interchangeable. You're not going to find another, in my opinion, a Patrick Queen that lines up so perfectly with Roquan Smith. Those two guys really only competing with Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw, in my opinion, for best linebacker tandem. And you saw how important that was in the playoffs to get a running mate for Roquan Smith, who has really become that Ray Lewis personality, character, leader for that defense. To have someone maybe a little bit lower, just in skill level talent, but they're right there with competing with Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw, and they have been so pivotal for them. You can't lose a guy like that, for me, in my opinion. And for them, I think they have to focus in on getting those guys back that got them to the AFC Championship, as many as they can, before they start thinking about who else can we add, who else would make us better. Really jumping the gun before they get their old reliable players back. That's the Ravens. The next team I want to talk about are the Bills. And the consensus that I've gotten from the rest of just articles that I've read, things that I've seen on TV, is that the Bills could be in for a period where they could get a little bit less talented. They could lose a lot of guys that have been prominent players for them this past season and just seasons in the past. Really, during this time that, if you want to call it their Super Bowl window, they could lose some of those guys. And I'm sure everyone's seen the discussions that are being had. How long do the Bills have before this Super window is closed immediately? And I'm not of the group that thinks, it's this year and then that's it, it's over. I think as long as they have Josh Allen, quite honestly, they could certainly compete in that division, because the quarterbacks in there aren't the top of the league caliber guys. The best one, if you want to say, could be Aaron Rodgers, but he is older and he's coming off a ruptured Achilles. How mobile, how dynamic is he going to be? And then the other one's Tua, but is he even going to be with the Dolphins past this next season? I think there's no doubt with the Bills that Josh Allen's going to be there, so I think as long as they have him, they'll have a chance. But they will lose potentially guys like Micah Hyde, their starting safety, Daquan Jones, Leonard Floyd, Dane Jackson are some of the free agents that they could lose. AJ Epinesa as well. Josh Allen does give you that talent, that chance, but the rest of these guys, like I'm sure every other successful team has, these other guys, make it more whole, more united. It fits everything perfectly like a puzzle if you have all this supporting staff, a great defense to rely upon sometimes if offensively you don't want to throw it all on Josh Allen to carry you there. They've had that kind of defense, but now you don't know where it's going to stand if they lose a locker room guy, a leader like Micah Hyde, a pass rusher like Leonard Floyd, a corner like Dane Jackson. I know you have Tre'Davious White coming back, but other than that, it's not looking too hot for their corners. So there's a lot of ifs, maybes, and potentials that could happen with them. But for me, with all that being said, the one thing that I would get into the mindset of thinking, if I'm the Bills, one thing that they have to do is kind of strengthen or retool their offense to kind of be more of a running offense than a gunslinging offense, high-scoring one that's kind of pushed now with the NFL. In my opinion, I think they have a really exciting tight end pairing. Dawson Knox is a little bit older, but Dalton Kincaid really showed out this year, and I think Josh Allen built a great relationship with him, went to him in some crucial moments. I think that trust is only going to grow. And I know there's trade rumors with Stephon Diggs, but I don't really see him going anywhere. So if you have those two, Gabe Davis is also an unrestricted free agent, and he could walk. But as long as you have Stephon Diggs, I believe maybe draft another receiver or sign one that's cheaper through free agency. And you have those two tight ends and really build your offense through the run with James Cook, because I think he showed his level, or he took his level to another dimension this season. If you kind of retool that offense to run, Josh showed to be a great runner this past season as well. If you retool that offense, kind of change its style, its identity to really running teams into the ground, running through that O-line, option plays, just quick throws to Diggs, to the tight ends, really make it so Josh doesn't have to hold the ball too long, extend too many plays, and potentially throw an interception, make errors. That's also another thing that's been connected to Josh Allen his whole career. He makes too many mistakes. He tries to be the hero too many times, and it costs them. I think trying to retool their offense to this sort of style will significantly drop that, and you still get to enjoy Josh Allen being a runner, still using his arm if he's not throwing as often, not trying to make a big play. That's the Bills. And now I want to talk about the Texans. And how much better could it get for the Texans? They were lucky enough to find their quarterback for the next probably 10 years in CJ Stroud. But they have a bit more cap space, $61.9 million. They're picking number 23 in the first round, and they have 8 picks overall. And they don't have too many big free agents. Jonathan Grenard and Dalton Schultz, Steven Nelson are the biggest ones I identified. But other than that, it's not too many guys that you wouldn't mind losing or that you couldn't retool, get younger at those positions through the draft. And Jonathan Grenard is eligible for the franchise tag, and I think they'll ultimately tag him because, pass rushers, like I mentioned in the segment before, if you didn't catch it, are in that 24 to 27 range, and I just think they would rather spend that in the move that I believe that they should make in trying to get a guy like Derrick Henry or Saquon Barkley. I would love that move for the Texans, especially because Devin Singletary is also a free agent, and if you go all in on a Derrick Henry, a Saquon Barkley, you can let him walk. Yeah, you might pay one of these guys a little bit more, but if you tag Grenard, push his negotiations off a little bit, you can work with some money that a Saquon, a Derrick Henry would require. And it's not too much because the running back market is not the best. If I was a running back, the running back market would be awful for me because it's very undervalued. A lot of teams don't think they deserve a lot of money. So it's not going to be too crazy to get him for maybe a year or two if it's Derrick Henry, or maybe a little bit longer, 3 or 4 years if it's Saquon Barkley, if you really think he could be that kind of player for them, which I believe he can be. And that's the kind of direction I want them to go, really go all in and helping CJ Stroud, this exciting young Texans team, to be even more special with Tank Dell, Nico Collins. If they re-sign Dalton Schultz, now they get an exciting running back that could do so much for their offense besides just running it in the pass game. It'll be really exciting for the Texans if they go this route, and I think it'll really elevate them to pushing the Chiefs, the Bengals, the Ravens in those bigger games in the playoffs. But the second to last team would be the Browns. Not too much here in free agency-wise. They could rework Chubb's contract to get him to pay less and free up some more cap space, but the route I kind of want them to go is pretty simple, just because they don't have a lot of factors, is to try and find another playmaker that would pair up with Amari Cooper in the offense, whether it be a wide receiver or running back, because Kareem Hunt is also going to be a free agent, but mostly I'm hoping that they get a wide receiver because Amari Cooper is still A top 12, definitely wide receiver. If you want to put him top 10, I wouldn't argue that in this league. I just think they're missing that option for Deshaun Watson when he comes back, to stop looking at Amari Cooper so much. If he's being double teamed and triple teamed and making mistakes, if they get somebody else that's maybe proven through free agency or an exciting young player through the draft, it'll definitely help them because their defense played lights out this past season. They don't really have to worry too much about them. It's just complementing them now with offense and getting the best out of Deshaun Watson because you're paying him a lot of money to be their franchise quarterback. So that's the direction I believe they could go. And finally, for the Steelers, it's ugly for them. They don't have many free agents to try to re-sign. It's really just about, for them, finding the guy that can compete with Kenny Pickett. Which quarterback in free agency do you think could be that guy? A Russell Wilson, a Kirk Cousins, trading for Justin Fields? If it's not one of them, I think they have to get someone to compete with Kenny Pickett through the draft. Just kind of tug at the idea for Kenny Pickett, like, oh, my job is not safe. Just make him think that for a second, because I think it'll not only motivate Kenny Pickett to play a little bit better if he has that competition, it'll work out better for the Steelers, because in the end, if the competition doesn't work out and you realize Kenny's not your guy, you don't invest too much into something money-wise with a free agent or draft-wise in a quarterback if you draft one after the 4th round, that it won't harm you too much in the future. That's the direction I kind of want them to go if you're the Steelers. Serious competition for Kenny Pickett, and just to get a better understanding of where the quarterbacks that you have on your roster are and what you can do moving forward. And finally, for the Dolphins, it's quite simple. I talked about them before and a little bit today. Re-sign your most important players in free agency and really going all in on this season, I believe, because after this season, you have a decision to make on Tua. Some other players might not be there, just depending on who's a free agent next offseason and who you get a deal done with this season. It might not be a long-term deal because they are over the cap, like I mentioned, $51 million over the cap or something like that. I think they're more of in a win-now situation with Tua under a manageable contract than they would be potentially paying Tua. I don't believe that the Dolphins will pay him that much money. I actually don't think many teams will pay him more than probably 35 max, in my opinion, per year. But that just also has to do with the injuries and, lack of success in the later months. But you never know on the other side. But that's just where I'm at. If they go all in this season, which is what I believe they should do, I think it'll just not only give them a better idea of what they need to do going forward after that, but if you go all in, do everything you can this season to make sure Tua can be as successful as possible. And if it doesn't work out, then you can make that decision to get rid of him, bring in some other different players that you are willing to lose in next year's free agency, now that you know that Tua is not your guy or that you need to go in a different direction. Those are the other 6 teams that made it into the AFC, and what I believe they should do to take that step forward and improve and just build a better organization, better system for them in the future, and not make a harsh, rash move to mess it all up now and pay for it later. But that's all the time I have for you guys today. I want to thank everyone for tuning in to this live show of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your engagement and reactions and everything means a lot to us and to me, so please remember to subscribe, like, and comment on the show, as well as following us on our other media outlets, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, for more of this sort of sports content and just other topics other than sports as well. Please, I want to remind you guys again to join me again tomorrow for more discussion and storylines around the NFL and just football in general. But for now, I've been your host, Manny Maradiaga, wishing you a good afternoon and hoping that you guys will all join me again tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.